Welcome back to SM Sports Radio. We got a lot for you guys this week, starting with college football conference championship predictions for each of the Power 4 conferences now, as weird as that is to say still with the Pac-12 gone. We've got an update on our Kennesaw State and UNLV dynasties. We actually played each other in this week's set of games, so you'll find out how that went. And then news from the past week of action in the MLB. But let's go ahead and start it off with our conference championship predictions. And I know last week we mentioned our playoff predictions, so that'll kind of give you as a clue as who is where in this, but we wanted to kind of give you guys more of an explanation of why we think these teams will be here and what particularly we think is going to happen in each of these conferences. So we're going to start out with the SEC, and Samuel, who do you have?
Well, we learned last week that I have Ole Miss representing the SEC as my 2 seed in the college football playoff, so naturally they are my winner of the Southeastern Conference, and I actually have them defeating Texas in that game. So just a little bit about Ole Miss heading into the season. Obviously, the main news out of Oxford is you lose Quinshon Judkins, but I offer you Ulysses Bentley IV, who actually is pretty good himself. He's an SMU transfer who served as the backup last season in Oxford and was very serviceable, had 3 games in which he had 9 yards per carry or more, so Ole Miss still likes what they have in terms of the backfield. Obviously, you know what you're going to get in Jackson Dart, who last season threw for 3,300 yards, 23 touchdowns, and just 5 interceptions, adding another 8 touchdowns on the ground. And he's got a plethora of weapons around him. Trey Harris, Jordan Watkins, tight end Caden Prescorn. Those guys combined for 2,100 receiving yards and 15 touchdowns last year. You had a guy like Juice Wells, the transfer out of South Carolina, into the fold there. The Ole Miss offense will be just fine. Defense is more of the question, but got some transfers over there as well. Most notably, Trey Amos from Alabama at corner, Arkansas linebacker Chris Paul Jr., a few others there for Ole Miss. Then on the Texas side of things, Texas, you obviously have Quinn Ewers coming back, and you do lose guys like Worthy, Adonai Mitchell, Jordan Whittington. But then, once again, for Texas, you bring in guys like Bond from Alabama, Matthew Golden from Houston, Silas Bolden from Oregon State, and tight end Amari Niblack from Alabama. So I think I kind of alluded to it last week. Texas has already gotten a taste of what the college football playoff is like, obviously in that close loss to Washington. So those are going to be my 2 teams to face off in the Southeastern Conference, Ole Miss over Texas.
Yeah, I also have Texas losing my SEC championship game, but it is to Missouri for me. And I've talked about Missouri a lot. You guys kind of know what direction I'm heading in with this. It's the offense, and it starts with Luther Burden, really, and Brady Cook, who's the guy throwing to him. Obviously, you lose Cody Schrader, but there's still going to be a lot of production on that offensive end. This Missouri team is still a very, very good offense, and don't think the defense is just dead because you lost Darius Robinson, Tyron Hopper, and your 2 starting corners. There are still a lot of good players on this defense, and namely Johnny Walker Jr., who was a huge breakout pass rusher for them last year, and was part of the reason Darius Robinson was able to put up such great numbers is because you didn't have double teams every play on Robinson in those obvious passing situations because you had to cover Walker as well. You had to block him too. So both of those guys were able to get their opportunities, and expect Walker to really lead this defensive line this year with Robinson gone to the NFL. And the back end is still good. Great corner transfer from Clemson, Toriano Pride Jr., and their nickel corner, I think, is going to be one of the more fun players to watch in the SEC this season in Dalen Carnell. This is a guy who is a feisty player. I feel like Brian Branch is an unfair comparison just because he was so good of a player that would make expectations that I don't think Carnell could necessarily live up to, but think of a similar play style, at least, even though not quite the same ability, where he's going to be running downhill, he's going to be all over the place, really feisty in coverage, and this is a guy that can really be the spark for a defense. I know that these nickel corners are a lot of times undervalued, but they can really be the heart and soul of a lot of defensive units, and I think Carnell's going to do exactly that for Missouri this year. He's the energy guy. He's the guy that's going to be the soul of this defense and really bring them up. I think, honestly, playing a little bit above their talent level even, and then also it's the schedule, too, for Missouri. Not a lot of tough games. They welcome Oklahoma to Missouri. in the midway point of the year, and then they also play at Alabama. But other than that, not a lot of difficult games for the Tigers, especially by SEC standards. So I would expect them to be able to run that schedule pretty much and end up in Atlanta for sure. And Samuel talked a lot about Texas and the new weapons they have coming in. And I think one that's gone under the radar a little bit is Silas Bolden, who you mentioned briefly. This is a guy who was really the main threat at Oregon State for DJ Uiagalelei last year, and honestly bailed DJ out of a lot of plays, made some spectacular catches. This is a guy who can create separation too. And when you already have Isaiah Bond on one side, Silas Bolden on the other, those are two elite separators at the receiver position that's going to do a lot for Texas this year. Then you bring in a tight end Amari Niblack, who's kind of been a little, I wouldn't say underappreciated at Alabama, but I think he's a very quality player. I wouldn't say he is necessarily a Jatavian Sanders, but still a good player to bring in for Texas. And then the Texas running back system, there's always next guy up, next guy ready to go. So they'll definitely have something in the backfield. And obviously we know how good Steve Sarkisian is of a play designer and a play caller for Texas. So I think Texas is honestly the most talented team in the SEC. I think Ole Miss is a close second with Georgia right behind. I just think Texas gets a lot of their toughest games at home this year, including Georgia. I just don't think that they have the same, or they don't have as easy of a schedule as Missouri does. So I think they'll be a bit more beat up coming into this championship game. So I think Missouri is going to be able to take advantage of that. But I think this is going to be an absolutely incredible conference championship matchup. I'm really looking forward to it, really hope it happens. But I think Missouri gets the edge over Texas purely because I don't think that Texas is equipped to cover Luther Burden and Missouri's threats on the back end. I think that Missouri actually has a better secondary, especially with Dalen Carnell and Toriano Pride now, to really kind of slow down the Texas receivers more so than Texas can do with the Missouri receivers. And I also think Missouri is better equipped in the pass rush department than Texas after Texas loses a few of its key defensive line pieces to the NFL this past season in Tavondre Sweat and, who did the Seahawks draft? Whose name I always forget. The other spectacular nose tackle for Texas, whose name escapes me right now, who I cannot remember for the life of me. Anyways, you guys know who I'm talking about. Drafted by the Seahawks, like 12th overall. Very, very good player up front for Texas. But with the loss of those guys, I think that Missouri has the edge, not just in the pass rush, but really the entire defensive side of the ball, which, as weird as it is to say, especially when you think of this Missouri team, I just think they're good enough to get it done. With a lighter schedule, I think they'll come in less banged up, so I would expect Missouri to win the SEC as a result.
Yeah, I'm really interested to see just the difference in comfortability between teams like Missouri, who obviously you've got that established connection between Luther Burden and Brady Cook. Some of these other teams like Texas, Alabama, Georgia, that are bringing in these transfer weapons. I'm interested to see if Missouri's offense has a leg up on teams like this, just because this will be year 2 of that connection. Obviously, you've got all these guys coming in
year
for Texas.
3 of that connection.
Yeah, year 3 of the connection. You got all these guys coming in as newcomers for Texas. Obviously, super talented players, a very deep room of playmakers, but I think there's something to just that familiarity, and I think that's why Mizzou definitely is a viable threat. So I could definitely see that scenario unfolding.
Yeah, and you mentioned the kind of transfer portal culture now. It's not dissimilar to me to what you saw with, or what you are still seeing with the one and dones in college basketball, where you maybe have
a good point.
Less gelling of a roster because all these new guys are coming in all the time. You don't necessarily have that continuity, and so maybe teams like that will struggle, because I would say it's even harder to come in and learn a system like that in football, where it's such a big playbook. Everything is completely different. So I'd be curious to see over the next couple of years whether those teams that you get new transfer portal additions every year, whether they'll be able to sustain success. I think Ole Miss this year will be a very good indication if that's a viable strategy with the amount of transfers they brought in on the defensive side, but we'll have to see what happens. And by the way, Byron Murphy, the Texas defensive lineman that I cannot remember the name of.
You mentioned the running back room at Texas, and now I raise you an even better running back room, a running back room that is widely known and established as the best running back room in all of the country. Don't think that's up for debate, and that is the running back room of the Ohio State Buckeyes.
Well, a little bit later we'll get to a running back room that might be better.
We'll see. Quinshon Judkins and Travion Henderson. You obviously know what you're going to get from Travion Henderson. You bring in a different type of back in Judkins, more of an elusive back. Obviously, Will Howard at the helm for Ohio State. We've already mentioned that is an upgrade from Kyle McCord from last season. How much of an upgrade we'll see, not positive yet on that front, but we know that Emeka Egbuka is uber talented at receiver. Carnell Tate, another playmaker for Ohio State, and hearing good things out of camp about true freshman Jeremiah Smith.
Yeah, he's going to be incredible.
Ryan Day's super high on him. And another thing that we haven't really talked about yet on this podcast is Chip Kelly coming in as the offensive coordinator.
Yeah.
Ryan Day surrendering play calling duties over to Chip Kelly, his longtime mentor.
That's definitely a I'm on the hot seat move from Ryan Day.
Oh, yeah. Everyone knows that Ryan Day is on the hot seat, including Ryan Day. And I think in terms of Ohio State, it definitely makes it a little bit easier that now Michigan's getting the hammer put down on them with all these sanctions. That's going to be interesting to see how that all pans out. So in light of that, I'm actually going to have Ohio State facing off against the Oregon Ducks in the Big Ten championship game. Oregon, a team that Micah's super high on, obviously, having them as his number one overall seed in the college football playoff. I'll let him get into why he thinks Oregon will actually come out on top of the team that I think. I didn't say that in a great way, but I think Ohio State wins over Oregon in the Big Ten championship. Let Micah tell you why he thinks Oregon will win.
Yes, so obviously both these teams have incredible offenses. They're both going to be very difficult to stop. Obviously, Dylan Gabriel at the helm for Oregon with new threats, Tez Johnson and Evan Stewart on the outside. But let me talk you through Oregon's secondary. I think this is really where they have the edge over Ohio State. Ohio State with the great receivers, but somewhat unproven. Emeka Egbuka, obviously you know what you get from him, but let's say Jeremiah Smith ends up as your number 2 option. Obviously, he's probably going to be a great player, but if you get to a conference championship setting like him, or like the Big Ten championship, it's hard for me to trust a true freshman no matter how good they are. You never quite know what you're going to get. That's not saying he'll be bad. I think he could absolutely show out. But you look at Oregon's cornerback group, they stole Jabbar Muhammad from Washington, who has been incredible the last couple seasons, was a huge reason Washington made their playoff run that they did. Then they get Cam Alexander from UTSA, a name that has been really under the radar, but that's a long guy. That's a very good corner. And how about UTSA kind of becoming a corner factory with Tariq Woolen? And now I think Cam Alexander is not the athlete Tariq Woolen is, obviously, but I think he's a better technician, honestly, at this point in his career than Woolen was. And you just look at other returning corners for Oregon. Obviously, you know what you're going to get from Jaleel Florence. He's been a solid contributor the last couple years for the Ducks. Roderick Pleasant, another very good corner. And you start looking at this DB group and you go, oh, that's 4 solid corners. And with the Dan Lanning defense, if you have corners that can even lock up for maybe 2.5 seconds, a Dan Lanning defense is going to get pressure and it's going to get home. And I think that could be where Ohio State struggles. The Ohio State offensive line, while good, is not necessarily what it's been for the last couple years. You lose guys like Paris Johnson and Broderick Jones, or he was a Georgia player, never mind. All these tackles running together a little bit from the last couple years, but you lose Paris Johnson Jr., and the talent on this offensive line, like I said, is still there. I just think that the Oregon defensive line talent is going to be better. You've seen them build up the last couple years under Dan Lanning. Kayvon Thibodeau, obviously. Brandon Dorless was another great defensive lineman for the Ducks. And they always seem to have these hyper-athletic linebackers that can just run sideline to sideline. Think Noah Sewell, think Justin Flo, who are both very athletic linebackers. And I just think Oregon has more team speed on the defensive side of the ball than Ohio State does. And with how important speed is now in modern college football, especially stopping both these high-flying offenses, I think that just sets up Oregon better versus Ohio State. I also think Oregon getting a shot at Ohio State early in the season will make a big difference. I think Oregon wins that game, but I think that when you are able to play a team early in the season and come back later, obviously you're going to have more of an insight into what their strengths are, what their weaknesses are. And I think you give Dan Lanning a shot to grasp the weaknesses of a team. He's not going to fall for that a second time. You did see, I will say, counterpoint, you saw that exact thing happen with Washington last year to Dan Lanning. I just think Washington is a special case because that is a big rivalry for Oregon. And honestly, I'll completely admit that Kalen DeBoer owned Oregon while he was at Washington. He had the Ducks number every year, but I think that's going to be a very different case between Dan Lanning and Ryan Day. I think Dan Lanning is a much better coach than Ryan Day. I think he'll be able to adapt a lot better. So that is why I have Oregon winning the Big Ten and being my number 1 seed for the playoffs.
Definitely another conference championship that I could see going either way. I think we can both agree that it'll probably be Oregon and Ohio State in that game regardless. Now moving on to the Big 12. For me, it is going to be the Utah Utes as the champions over Kansas State. Get into Utah real quick. You obviously get Cam Rising back, which will be
for his 13th college season.
Yeah, pretty much. For a much-needed breath of fresh air for an offense that really struggled last season with only 166 passing yards per game and only 15 total passing touchdowns all of last season. But another thing that's going under the radar, his top target and tight end Brant Keith missed last season as well. So you get both of those guys back in 2024, and you add a big play threat in Southern Cal transfer Dorian Singer, who was a first-team All-Pac-12 in 2022 at Arizona, actually his first stop. So this is his third school. Dorian Singer having a little bit of a down year last season, but not as good of a team at Southern Cal that we saw last season, although Caleb Williams was pretty good. So if you can't be good at Southern Cal,
I was about to say, I would argue if a receiver can't produce Caleb Williams, you might have a problem.
Yeah, might have a problem there, but definitely a deep threat type for Utah. You know what you're going to get from Kyle Whittington defense. Last season, just 19.3 points per game, and you return 8 starters. I think they're going to face off, like I mentioned earlier, against Kansas State. You know what you're going to get? Well, you don't quite know what you're going to get yet for Avery Johnson. I like to think you know what you're going to get just because.
Samuel knows what you're going to get from Avery Johnson. He's been saying it for months.
Yes, I'm definitely an Avery Johnson appreciator, but an underrated part of that offense is star running back DJ Giddens, who last year ran for 1,200 yards and 10 touchdowns. You get 3 of your receivers back in Jaden Jackson, J.C. Brown, and Keegan Johnson.
Too many J's.
And you also get a transfer in Dante Cephas from Penn State. So a lot of weapons there that I think are going to kind of put Kansas State over the top, or at least for runner-up in the conference, over teams like Oklahoma State and Arizona.
Arizona's interesting to me.
Yeah, I'm going for Kansas State this season. So, and then defensively, you have a lot of depth at defensive end. You have linebackers Austin Moore and Desmond Purnell, who are just tackling machines. And so, yeah, that is my Big 12 prediction.
Well, I have Utah losing my Big 12 championship game, but it is to Arizona. I just think this team is still good. They didn't become not good because Jed Fish left. They're bringing in another great coach out of San Jose State, and Noah Fafita is a great college quarterback. I don't think he'll be an elite NFL prospect just because of some size issues, but he is an incredible college quarterback. Tedroy McMillan, you know what you're getting from him. He is incredible. And this running back by committee system that they have, I think is very underrated. Quali Conley is a senior this year, a ton of experience bringing in to kind of lead this running back room. And then on the all-name team for Arizona, you have Rayshon Speedy Luke Jr., which, holy cow, what a name for running back. But he's going to be in their rotation as well as Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt and Kedrick Riscano. And I think that is a very good system. You look at these teams recently who've had more of a running back by committee. This 4 running back system, all those guys are going to be fresh all the time. And you look at the system that is being brought in from San Jose State, and this is kind of a run and shoot type system, more so than what you saw from Arizona last year. And I think this personnel is really going to flourish in that. I think you're going to see McMillan put up incredible numbers at receiver. I think you're going to see Fafita put up incredible numbers at quarterback. And the defense is still good. I wouldn't say it's amazing, but I also don't think you're going to need an incredible defense to win the Big 12 this year. I think there are enough bad defenses to where if you're Arizona, you can just run and shoot your way to a conference championship. I would say the one potential tripping point is Utah, and that's why I have them in this conference championship game as the losers. And obviously Cameron Rising, like I said, coming back for his 13th college season, and Brant Keith as a tight end. Utah kind of becoming a tight end factory after Dalton Kincaid and now Brant Keith. And Keith is a very dynamic threat. I think he's not quite Kincaid, but he can do more than just block and be a possession threat at the tight end position. This is a guy that can actually stretch the field for you. And you might not even need Dorian Singer, honestly, because like we said, maybe if you struggle to produce with Caleb Williams, you're not that elite of a receiver. But we've seen Kyle Whittingham teams not necessarily need that elite offensive threat to produce on offense. And when you have such a good defense like the Utes are going to, I really don't think it'll matter a lot in conference play. I obviously had them making my college football playoff in the 10 spot, and I think if it was Oklahoma State in the conference championship game, Utah would win. I just think Arizona has enough of an offense to where they can overcome the Utes, because we've seen now college football the last 5 or 10 years. Good offenses are starting to beat good defenses now rather than good defenses beating good offenses. So because of that, I have Arizona taking home the Big 12 this year.
Yeah, the thing for me there, I just think Utah's defense is a lot more similar to Arizona's offense. Then I think there's a much bigger drop off between Utah's offense and Arizona's defense. So that's why
that's fair.
That's why I kind of lean Utah. I think I would say the same thing if you stack up Utah against any team in the Big 12, which is ultimately why I have them winning it. Now over in the ACC, it's pretty obvious why I'm high on Clemson and why I have them winning the ACC championship. But let me get into why I think it'll actually be the Miami Hurricanes and not a team like Florida State, who is actually favored to win the conference in 2024 by, at least on an odds basis and by media preseason predictions. Miami's offense is just going to be absolutely elite. It's going to be the best offense in the ACC. You have Cam Ward at quarterback, the transfer from Washington State. You have another transfer from the Pac-2 now in Damian Martinez. It's a pretty interesting dynamic there with those two West Coast transplants into this offense. You also have the best receiver in the ACC in Xavier Restrepo. I think that trio is just going to put up absurd numbers. And then defensively, pretty good as well. You do lose safeties Cameron Kitchens and James Williams to the NFL draft, but the quarterback room's looking really good with senior coming back in Darrell Porter Jr. You got a Marshall transfer in Diani Hill, or however you pronounce his first name. And then you've got another Washington transfer in Michelle Powell at nickel. And so ultimately, you combine all those factors together and the fact that I'm not high on Florida State at all this season, and I have Miami meeting the Clemson Tigers in Charlotte with Clemson coming out on top.
Yeah, Miami is definitely an intriguing team. You look at the Maui Goa brothers as well, in Francisco and Francis, who are both incredible athletes. I honestly don't think the loss of the safeties is that huge, especially Cameron Kitchens. He just is not a good athlete. He was serviceable because he had good instincts as a cover player, and especially as a run defender. I don't think he was as good as a lot of people gave him credit for. He just is not that great of an athlete, and it showed big time in his RAS score, which I'm pretty sure was under 2, if I remember correctly. But
that's not good.
No, but with all that said, I'm still taking Virginia Tech to lose to Clemson in the ACC title game. You look at this offense, and I wouldn't say it's quite Miami level, but I trust the Virginia Tech defense more than the Miami defense. I think Virginia Tech has a much more favorable schedule than Miami does this year, but the Virginia Tech offense, obviously Kyron Drones, you know what you're going to get from there, but then the returning production at the receiver position is incredible, starting with the offensive coordinator Fontel Mines, then Ollie Jennings, DeQuan Felton, Jalen Lane, Stephen Gosnell, all incredible threats coming back for Kyron Drones. Anytime you can bring back your starting quarterback, your top 4 receiving threats, and also your starting tight end, they have a 6-year guy coming back as well. How do you not take a team that has that much returning experience? I know Miami has brought in Cam Ward and they brought in Damian Martinez, but it kind of goes back to my earlier point of, are you sure those guys can gel in their first season together, where you have this Virginia Tech offense that's been together for years already and that chemistry is already built up? I think they're going to be incredible this season. I would agree the pure talent in Miami is better. It's the best offensive line in the ACC by far, and I will say that unit has had time to gel together, so I would expect that offensive line to be absolutely dominant. It's just, can the rest of that offense get on the same page? everyone that's been watching the podcast knows about my doubts about Mario Cristobal's ability to coach quarterbacks, so I won't go into that again. I just think I like the way this Virginia Tech team gels a bit more, and I think they will be able to come out on second place in the conference as we both have Clemson winning this conference. I just think the talent gap between Clemson as an overall unit and every other team in this conference is just too big for them not to win it, especially on the defensive side. I know we've talked about Miami and Virginia Tech's offenses. Clemson's offense is, I think, right there with those two. If you look at personnel-wise, especially if Cade Klubnik can take that next step, then the Clemson defense is going to be top 3 to 5 in the nation. They're going to be absolutely incredible. You always have great athletes on the defensive side of the ball for Clemson. And then any team going into Death Valley is just not going to have a good time. And that's usually how it is for the Clemson Tigers. I would expect their one trap game, other than the Georgia game, obviously, I would expect their one potential trap game to be when they have to go to Blacksburg to play Virginia Tech. I would still expect them to come out on top of that. And if they are able to beat Virginia Tech in Blacksburg, Virginia Tech's not beating them on a neutral site in Charlotte. So I'm taking Clemson as well to win the ACC. Although I do want to talk about the ACC for a bit because I feel like everyone is saying, oh, all these under-the-radar teams in the ACC, Clemson's going to be good, Florida State's going to be good, Miami's going to be incredible, Virginia Tech's under the radar, Georgia Tech's under the radar, Louisville could be good. If that's all the case, why are people saying the ACC is easily the fourth best conference and it's not close?
Yeah, I don't know. And I think you bring up a good point there because we're kind of talking about the Big 12 as wide open, but it's really only wide open between the top 4. And I think after that,
maybe West Virginia.
I think after that, it's just a massive drop off. I just don't think teams like Kansas or teams like Colorado,
Iowa State.
I don't think any of them have any chance of even winning games that
I would say
shift
Kansas
landscapes
might.
as much.
If Jalen Daniels can stay healthy, I think Kansas might and West Virginia might. I would say those are kind of, when you look at the Big 12, it's your Big 4 with Utah, Arizona, Oklahoma State, Kansas State. Then Kansas and West Virginia are kind of in a weird middle ground, and then there's everyone else. So I do agree with you about that. And it's, like you say, wide open for just these top 4 teams. Who out of that is going to come outside and win it? I don't really think anyone is, but you look at this ACC, I could see easily 6 different teams with a chance to make this conference championship game. So if you're a conference with that many good teams at the top, it's that wide open, why are they so clearly the 4th best compared to the Big 12? Because I think we'd all agree Big 10, SEC are the top 2, clearly. But this fight for 3rd, I think the ACC is kind of fallen victim to having, first off, being run by Clemson for so many years, to where other teams really struggled to compete against Clemson other than the one random Miami year where they still got kind of blown out. Then it switched to Florida State, and the ACC was unfortunate to where when it kind of swapped to Florida State, Clemson kind of fell off at that time. But now that all these teams are good again, I just don't see how you can't acknowledge that the talent level and the team level is at least on par with the Big 12, if not better.
Yeah, for sure. And I just think of a team like Boston College in the ACC that I don't think really has a counterpart in the Big 12 in terms of how that offense could play spoilers in terms of getting into shootouts with
they're my
with
West
some big
Virginia.
teams.
I think that team is built so similarly to West Virginia.
I think West Virginia is a little bit ahead of them, but I think when you're talking about teams that we're pretty much acknowledging that are going to finish at the bottom of the conference, if you're comparing Boston College, who I believe was picked 8th or 9th in the ACC, you just compare them to the 8th or 9th best team in the Big 12, which might be Colorado, might be someone. Is there anyone worse than Colorado in the Big 12? Maybe
Cincinnati.
Yes, like
Houston.
Cincinnati. I think I would take BC against Cincinnati 10 times out of 10.
Yeah,
with Thomas Castellanos and
or like
the
a Baylor or
they've got
somebody,
coming
TCU.
Back. Yeah, and
then we haven't even talked about SMU at all. Yeah. The talent level SMU as well is going to be incredible this season. So that's like 6 or 7 teams we think could easily beat some Big 12 teams. Actually, I want to run through this right quick. Give me just a second to pull up the conference standings here, and let's compare these 2 conferences here. I think this is going to be a very interesting thing to do. All right, so we have the ACC and Big 12 preseason polls pulled up here, and we're going to make some picks on who we think would beat each other. And first up, it is the number 1 teams projected, Florida State versus Utah. I take Utah on that.
I take Utah as well.
So 1-0 Big 12. Now, Clemson, Kansas State. I take Clemson, and Samuel's heart, I think, goes Avery Johnson, but I think he goes Clemson anyway.
My heart does not go Avery Johnson.
I'm just messing with you.
That's the one case where it really does not at all. So yeah, we'll tie the ACC will tie up the series there 1-1.
Yes. Then Miami versus Oklahoma State. I actually, as down as I am on Miami compared to a lot of other people, I take Miami because I don't think Oklahoma State's defense can hang.
Yeah, we all know how I feel about Miami and how I also feel that Oklahoma State's not going to be very good, so I'll take Miami as well.
So 2-1 ACC. Now let's move on to NC State versus Kansas. I don't know. I think that's close. Neutral field, I think I actually take Kansas for the more dynamic nature of that offense.
I'd take NC State just because of the defense and Grayson McCall, veteran quarterback, stepping in. You know what you're going to get from Concepcion in terms of playmaker production at NC State, and I just think that the defense, especially, I think those defenses, when you stack them up, I think NC State has a clear advantage defensively. So that's the first one we kind of disagree.
So you're 3-1, I'm 2-2. Then Louisville versus Arizona, I'm taking Arizona.
Yeah, that's just criminal, underrated Arizona there for the Big 12.
Yeah, 3-2 for you, and then something for me. I forget what I'm talking about. Anyway, Virginia Tech and Iowa State. Virginia Tech by 1,000,000.
Yes.
Then SMU versus West Virginia. Holy fun game.
Yeah, that's a coin flip.
That would be incredible. So we'll call it a half on that, I think. Then North Carolina, who is somehow 8th, versus UCF. Give me UCF by 1,000,000,000,000 because North Carolina is going to be awful this year.
UNC's only hope is if Amarian Hampton rushes for 250 yards in that game. So
yeah. And if that's in the bounce house, too, no chance. Although I think we're thinking neutral field here.
Yes.
But then Georgia Tech versus Texas Tech in the Battle of Techs. Give me Georgia Tech. Haynes King masterclass versus a non-existent Texas Tech defense. Then Cal versus TCU. TCU doesn't have a run defense. Cal has Jaden Knott.
Yes.
Yeah, bad matchup for TCU. Give me Cal. Then Duke versus Colorado. I think it's close, but I think Duke. I just think Duke's defense is good enough to where Colorado doesn't have enough to hang there. Then number 12, Syracuse, Baylor, Syracuse.
Yep.
Baylor is not good.
Fran Brown, new head coach out of Georgia.
Yes. Then number 13, Pitt versus BYU. A horrible game. I think I'd take BYU in that game.
Yeah, I'm not mad about that. That works.
Boston College beat Cincinnati by 1,000,000 in a game we just referenced a minute ago by accident.
Nice.
Didn't know they'd be together like that. Then in the Battle of 15s, Wake versus Houston. Give me Houston. Wake has no pulse.
Correct.
Then 16, Virginia, Arizona State. I think this would actually be a very entertaining game. I think Virginia wins because they have more talent at the quarterback position.
I agree.
And then we'll give Stanford a free win versus no one since the Big 12 only has 16 teams. But still, we picked maybe 4, 5 max Big 12 teams to win in a 16-game slate there when you look at the favored teams based on preseason polls. So why is the Big 12 perceived as so much better than the ACC? Then I don't really know. I think that has a chance to sort itself out over the season. The one thing I would be worried about if I was a fan of the ACC would be the fact that the ACC has enough good teams where they could all kind of beat up on each other, so the conference ends up looking worse than it actually is.
Right.
That would be my one concern. But I think the talent level in the ACC is much, much better than people are giving it credit for, especially at the quarterback position. The ACC quarterback position is so good this year. You run down the list. DJ Uiagalelei is at least solid at Florida State. Cade Klubnik at Clemson, Cam Ward at Miami, Grayson McCall at NC State are all great players. Kyron Drones at Virginia Tech, Haynes King at Georgia Tech, Thomas Castellanos we talked about at Boston College, Calandria for Virginia's not bad at all. And then Ohio State transfer Kyle McCord at Syracuse.
Yes.
The talent at quarterback in the ACC is very, very good this season. And honestly, I think it gives the Big Ten a run for its money in just purely quarterback talent because the Big Ten is so top-heavy in quarterbacks. Right. You move down that list, once you get to like the Marylands and the Iowas of the Big Ten, who's playing quarterback for those teams? It's not the same level as a Thomas Castellanos for sure.
Yeah, you talk about beating up on each other. One thing that is kind of funny but is also true, the ACC boasts the toughest non-conference strength of schedule in terms of conference-wide of all the conferences in the FBS. So you're going to see pretty early on, even if these ACC teams end up knocking each other down a few rungs because of just the nature of everyone playing everyone, you're going to see week 1 Clemson stack up against how Clemson stacks up against Georgia. You're going to see week 1 how Miami stacks up against Florida. And there's more instances of that throughout the season. Florida State goes to South Bend to play Notre Dame.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's more that just are not at the forefront of my mind right now, but we're going to know how good the ACC is this year when they face teams from these other conferences.
Yeah, definitely. And so I just think we have to give the ACC a bit more credit. So that was our little ACC tangent there at the end of the conference championships predictions. But that's what we think is going to happen for your Power 4 championships this year. And now let's move on to the much more important world of video game football, as Kennesaw State, I say that every week. I'm not Kent State as much as I want to be, but Kennesaw State and UNLV actually took on each other this past week in the online Dynasty, and I mentioned a better running back room than Ohio State, and it is the Kennesaw State running back room with Gabriel Benyard and Michael Benefield, who are both absolute beasts for the Owls. The rest of the team is awful, but the two running backs are incredible, and they tried their best but could not pull off a win at UNLV, as Calvin Ridley and the Fightin' Gamblin' Rebels made a great effort to win 66-37. I would argue the game was closer than the final score indicated, as my team gave up once the fourth quarter hit and started fumbling the ball every other play. But, I mean, what can you do? Kennesaw State is not that great. Bars. But I had a couple good touchdown plays. One where my quarterback moved over to the left, stopped, read downfield, hit a white slot receiver on the run who managed to spin in for a touchdown. Then I hit Michael Benefield, the running back, out of the backfield on a different play earlier in the game, and he was able to run down the field dead like a defender, and then the UNLV free safety decided to go have a sandwich and didn't tackle him, and Benefield was able to dead leg himself into the end zone to score on that play. Those are probably my best two moments from that game, as Urban Meyer is still getting a bit used to running the spread option. It's kind of taken a minute to sink in for the Owls, but recruiting trail is going pretty well. I am close to getting a few commits from 3-star players, one of which is a 97-speed receiver, as Samuel gets flashbacks to the Arizona State team that he's played a couple times. Yes, but on the field, it is not going well for the Owls, who thankfully had a bye after the UNLV game. But I'll let Samuel give you his perspective from Calvin Ridley, the head coach of the UNLV Rebels of that game.
Yeah, so obviously Ridley and his guys pretty down on themselves, but Ridley shows up to team meeting the Thursday before the week 4. I think I've already had a bye. So this is week 4. The week 4 matchup between UNLV and the Kennesaw State Owls, and he just told these guys, like, man, you guys just put up some points against some Power 4 schools. We like what we have at quarterback. We like our guys. Defense, we need a little bit more effort from you guys, but kind of a get right spot. No offense to the Kennesaw State Owls, just a lot of.
Listen, we know what we are. We are the get-right game.
A lot of a talent disparity, at least for right now, as things stand in year 1 of the pod dynasty. And let me tell you what, this week 4 game was the Jacob DeJesus welcome to college football game. Over 200 yards, several touchdowns. Ricky White also emerging as a star receiver. So that duo is going to be very fun to use for Calvin Ridley and his squad this season. Defense, a lot of questions, especially in terms of stopping the run, as Kennesaw State just could do no wrong in terms of running the ball. Thankfully, a few ticky-tack fumbles that went UNLV's way.
And they injured my 2 running backs.
Maybe had to do with the UNLV raucous crowd. The upper bowl was empty. But maybe it had something to do with the lower bowl just losing its mind all game. But yeah, the cut stick was working to perfection. Were
there game bonus checks in the lockers for the players that injured my running backs?
There might have been more free play on the underground books. We'll never know. We're not gonna. There might be an investigation in a few years about that, but for right now, we're good on that front. But yeah, super fun game for UNLV. First win of the season. And the final score, as Micah mentioned earlier, 66-37. A little bit fortunate that some of these fumbles were decided by Kennesaw State that they would just not pick up the fumble for some reason. They just look at it sometimes.
The offensive linemen just kind of got mesmerized. They didn't know what to do with the football, since other than the center, they never really touch it. They were
True.
like,
And
that's basically what they did, and they just let the UNLV players recover it. But it was
an unfortunate break as well. Quarterback throwing out of a sack directly to my user linebacker, which was a pick six. So that the score is not reflective of what the game truly was. UNLV just happy to get its first win, 66-37. Once again, your score there. Then UNLV moved on into conference play in the Mountain West Conference, everyone's least favorite basketball conference.
Facts.
And they took on Fresno State at home. Or actually, can't remember if it was at home or at Fresno State, but you will see in these clips.
The fans at home were wearing red. That's all we can tell you.
UNLV once again coming out with a high-flying offense. Jacob DeJesus with a nice RPO play, scampered between blockers all the way to the house for a touchdown. It was 42-10 at the half, and then Calvin Ridley was running out of time before he had to leave, so he simulated the second half, and the final score after being up 42-10 at the half was 52-44.
We know Calvin really just had to make sure the spread was right at the end of the game.
Apparently he took Fresno State plus whatever the spread was there, but just thankful to get another win, get back to 500. 2-2, the 2-2 UNLV Rebels are on the road to bowl eligibility, so stay tuned for more Pod Dynasty updates.
Yes, and that is it for the Pod Dynasty for this week's show. And now let's talk about some MLB action, starting with a chase for history by the Chicago White Sox, as they are just 3 losses away for tying the MLB's all-time longest losing streak. It currently sits at 20, which is, I don't know if you know this, pretty bad.
Yeah, I'd say so.
Yeah, but anyway, the White Sox are terrible, and if they go on to tie that record, they would tie it at a game at home versus the Chicago Cubs, where a fireworks show is scheduled for after the game. So
Are the fireworks going to say, "We suck"?
They might. They might. I mean, how could you be a White Sox fan and even show up for that game? I would not buy a ticket.
Okay, why in the world, if you live in Chicago, would you be a White Sox fan? That's what I want to know.
It's the same reason why people choose to be like Chargers fans.
Yeah, I guess it's just
I am a Chargers fan.
It's a very small minority of people that actually
Clippers
live there and
fans.
want to. Yeah, it's like, why do you just voluntarily want to root for the JV team? I don't get it.
Well, at least I think for those two teams, it makes the most sense because Chicago or the Cubs are kind of
the north side versus south side deal.
White Sox are the south side.
I understand that.
So I say that makes a lot more sense than
I
maybe
will
the
say,
Lakers,
though,
the Clippers.
I have never met a White Sox fan in my entire life.
I've met a lot of people wearing White Sox hats, but not a lot of White Sox fans.
Yeah.
So
definitely not the same thing.
Maybe just a hat culture team.
Yeah,
you never know.
The fitted hat culture. I think the White Sox are very high in terms of
Probably like
fitted hat
third.
culture. Yeah, just a nice hat that goes with a lot of different outfits in terms of fashion.
Make the hat the manager. What could go wrong?
Yeah, can't be worse than their previous manager.
Yeah, at least they have good City and Connect uniforms and popular hats, but that's pretty much all you can say for the White Sox right now, and Garrett Crochet. But other than that, not a lot going right on the south side right now, and some would say nothing at all. Anyway, moving on from the terrible White Sox to the NL East race, which is starting to heat up quietly as the Phillies have gone 2-8 in their past 10. The Braves have gone 6-4, and the Mets are 5-5. And what that means is the Phillies lead the division at 66-45, Braves 6 games back at 60-51, Mets 7.5 at 59-53. So I would say the Braves kind of got a little bit of a boost with the Jorge Soler edition right now, and then Jorge Soler was for some reason called out at the plate in a game a couple days ago where he definitely should not have been, although there were many things that went wrong with MLB replay that day, so I don't know what the MLB headquarters was doing, but this division race that you called as over a couple months ago, I think it is starting to heat up, and I think the Phillies were really looking for an injection at the trade deadline, and all they really got was Austin Hayes, and if they can't find a way to make a spark within that team and turn it around, they could be in trouble.
Yeah, Bryce Harper, until their last game on Sunday, he was in the worst slump of his career, actually, and actually changed into the stirrup socks look instead of the long pants. He hiked up his pants.
Stirrups are fire.
And immediately hit either 1 or 2 home runs. I know it was at least 1, and the Phillies widened the margin back to 6 games. It got to as low as 5 games, but the Braves just not able to take advantage of a series against the lowest payroll in all of Major League Baseball, and that is the Miami Marlins, who boast a $14 million payroll this season post-trade deadline, which is 1/20th of what the Braves' payroll currently is. Obviously, a lot of that money is on the injured list with Spencer Strider and Ronald Acuna Jr. and Ozzie Albies. A lot of injuries in Atlanta this season. And I'm not going to recant my claim that the NL East is over for obvious superstitious reasons. Talking is hard. Superstitious reasons. That's a tongue twister for you if you want to try that one at home. But the Braves did dodge a bullet with Reynaldo Lopez not going on the injured list last week with forearm tightness. He actually did go on the injured list a few days later, backdated to his last start. They don't expect him to miss much time, just wanted to give him a little extra rest. You know what you've gotten from Chris Sale this season? He's scheduled to pitch on Wednesday. You've got Bryce Elder Tuesday, and I forget who pitches Thursday, but you got Max Fried back.
Is it Schwellenbach Day?
I don't think so, but it's somebody. Sunday, you got
in-depth analysis.
You got back Max Fried from the injured list, who actually pitched injured in the All-Star game, which was really annoying.
Yeah.
But yeah, the Braves definitely closing the margin a little bit thanks to the Phillies' ineptitude, I'll say. And yeah, not much going right for the Phillies right now. I just hope the Braves make the playoffs.
Well, we'll have to see what happens. I think that division race will get at least closer, if nothing else. But also want to give a big shout-out to Blake Snell, who threw the first no-hitter of his career. He's been a guy who a lot of people say, oh, he can't get past the seventh inning.
Who did he throw it against?
No one. Anyway, Blake Snell threw a no-hitter versus a team that may or may not wear red and may or may not be named after that color. But it was a great performance from him. And the Giants are such a weird team because they finally have the pitching production. Matt Chapman's going crazy. Freaking whatever his name is that hits like 10 home runs in the past 2 weeks. Tyler Fitzgerald, who is crazy hot right now for the Giants. And just the rest of the team is like, I don't want to play baseball anymore. And they've fallen completely off the face of the earth despite it seems like all their good players playing better. So very confusing, but I'll tell you what, if you ever want to get right series, play the Reds. It's goodness. Anyway, great no-hitter for Blake Snell. And also a guy we forgot to shout out was Dylan Cease, who threw a no-hitter as well. And Dylan Cease, incredible pitcher this year, was named July Pitcher of the Month. Justice for Blake Snell and or Hunter Green for that, honestly, because Dylan Cease's ERA was about 2 higher than both of those guys. But just great pitching at the top of the NL this year. Cy Young race is going to be very fun in the NL this season. And speaking of great players doing great things, how about Bobby Witt Jr. in July, who hit .489, as in almost 500, over a month.
Pretty crazy.
Yeah, had 7 bombs, 22 ribbies, 8 doubles, also a triple, 6 walks, 26 runs scored, 2 stolen bases, slugged .833, not OPS, slugged .833, and had a .520 on base in 23 games. Also, 22 RBIs in 23 games. I'll let you do the math on that one. It's almost an RBI per game for those at home. That's the math I can actually do. That's my level of math, is a number almost divided by itself. But Bobby Witt has been absolutely incredible, and this Royals team is just so fun right now. But weirdly, they can't seem to overhaul the Guardians, and they've fallen behind the Twins.
Yeah, just before we get to that as a whole, how about Bobby Witt Jr.? Obviously, you know about the extra base hits, 16 extra base hits, 28 singles is what you glean from that. Kind of weird. Only 2 stolen bases. Is he sacrificing stealing bases for just becoming the best hitter in Major League Baseball?
It feels like a good trade-off to me.
Yeah, definitely a good trade-off. And another great thing in terms of news for Royals fans, Bobby Witt Jr. is under contract through 2037.
Yeah, that's pretty good.
So get used to watching that guy playing shortstop
please sign
out
Ellie
in
to that
Kansas
kind of a
City.
deal right now, please.
We all know that will never happen because it is the Cincinnati Reds. But
also, we promoted Phil Castellini into a higher position in the front. The guy that told the fan. Okay, I'll talk about this later. Anyway, Bobby Witt.
Royals good.
Yes, Royals good.
Slipping down a little bit though, as you were mentioning.
Yeah. So. The AL Central, obviously really close right now. The Guardians have been, we know what they've been all season. They've been a very, very good baseball team. The Twins kind of seem to bob up and down, kind of above, below the Royals, depending on whether they're hot or not. Very streaky team so far this year. I don't know if they'll be able to stay hot all the way through, but right now I would be willing to bet on all 3 of those teams making the playoffs.
Yeah, I think that would be a good bet. I think this is going to be probably the most exciting division race in all of baseball, especially when you take into consideration the fact that there's going to be 3 teams vying for the AL Central crown. That was not a Royals pun, by the way, but I really hope the Royals win the AL Central. And so, yeah, especially when you look at the pitching staffs of these 3 teams, I think that's going to make for a very good October stretch run for any of them.
Yeah, and then just below the Central, there's the AL West, where the Mariners are back ahead of the Astros. Josh Hader can't pitch, and neither can anyone else on the team for Houston. But Mariners have kind of started to hit a little bit. It's not anything great still, but they're at least showing a pulse. You would think the addition of Randy Rosarenas had something to do with that. And then the Rangers just kind of hanging back in that weird 5 or 6 games back zone. It feels like they've been in all of summer, but we'll see if they can close that at all. And then one more guy I wanted to talk about who has somehow been going under the radar despite being an MLB The Show cover athlete this year, a huge name in baseball. It feels like just no one cares that he's been amazing, is Vlad Jr., who since getting a haircut on June 19th is hitting .384 with 58 hits, 15 bombs, 42 RBIs, 34 runs scored in 38 games. 42 RBIs in 38 games.
Pretty good.
15 home runs in 38 games.
And the Blue Jays are still in last place by a mile.
Someone needs to take scissors to Bo Bichette's hair if this is what it did to Vlad
Facts.
Jr. So
mandatory buzz cuts for the whole team.
Yes, mandatory buzz cuts for the entire Blue Jays organization right now. Maybe it's because you have Joey Votto in this. They also need a Joey Votto haircut, and they become good at baseball. Who, by the way, hit a home run today in his rehab assignment. So I'd love to see him back at the Major League level. But Vlad Jr. playing incredible right now, and the rest of the Blue Jays are not. That feels like what it's been since pretty much the start of June for them, as they are last in the division behind even the Rays. And by a long way, they're 51-61, which for a team that was kind of a sleeper to maybe win this division at the start of the year is just...
They're now asleep.
Yes, they are now very asleep. I would say, would you agree in saying this is the most underwhelming team this year?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Yeah, huge disappointment for them. And obviously, top of the AL East, Orioles, Yankees still right with each other. Actually tied as we record this at 67 and 46. Jackson Holliday back up at the Major League level. We'll see if he can do a little bit better than last time he was up. But I think that is it for MLB news, unless there's anything else you want to talk about. And with that, that is it for the show this week. So thank you guys for tuning in, and we will see you next time.